There are certain lobbies in the finals where you don't feel like you're playing against people. You feel like you're being hunted by ghosts. You turn a corner, nothing. You hear footsteps, nothing. You swear you just saw someone disappear and suddenly you're dead. Then you respawn, you look around, another light, invisible, and another one, and another. At some point, you stop asking, where are they? And you start asking, what kind of person chooses to play like this? Because, let's be honest, you don't accidentally become a Light Invis player. You choose it. You choose to be fragile. You choose to have less health. You choose to stay away from the center of the fight. You choose to disappear when things get dangerous, okay? And you choose to attack when the other player is least prepared. But here's the interesting part. I know this mentality because I used to be one of them. And once you've played enough Light Invis, you start realizing that you're not really playing the finals the same way everyone else is. You're playing a different game, a game built around one thing, control. The first thing you need to understand about the Invisible Light is that they don't necessarily want to win a fair fight. And that's not an insult, it's the entire point. A heavy wants to survive the fight. A medium wants to support the fight, but a light can simply decide, I don't want this fight, and disappear. That's an incredible psychological advantage. Because when you know you can leave a fight at any moment, you don't have to commit to bad situations. You can watch, you can wait, you can reposition, you can let two other players fight each other, while you stand somewhere nearby, completely invisible. And this is where the personality starts to become interesting. The Invisible Light is often a player who values information over confrontation. They want to know where you are. They want to know where your teammates are. They want to know how much health you have. They want to know when you're distracted. Because information creates certainty. And certainty creates confidence. The moment you know someone is weak, the fight changes. You're no longer asking, can I kill him? You're asking, when should I kill him? And that is a very different mentality. Think about a predator in the wild. It doesn't run into a group of animals screaming, let's fight. It watches, it waits, it looks for the weakest target, the distracted one, the isolated one, the one that doesn't know it's being watched. And then it moves. That's basically the Invisible Light. Not because the player is necessarily aggressive, but because their aggression is selective. They don't want everyone. They want the right person. And that's what makes invisibility so powerful psychologically. When you're visible, your opponent can react to you. When you're invisible, your opponent has to react to the possibility of you. And that changes everything. Suddenly every doorway becomes suspicious. Every empty hallway becomes suspicious. Every sound becomes suspicious. You start checking corners that you would normally ignore. You start looking behind you. You stop feeling safe. And that's the real weapon. The weapon isn't invisibility. It's uncertainty.
Gather up!
There's something fascinating about fighting an invisible player. Even when they're not there, they're still affecting you. You could be standing in an empty room and thinking about them. You could be fighting another team and wondering if a light is watching. You could be carrying the cash out and suddenly you're checking every angle. That's psychological warfare, because the invisible light doesn't have to attack you to influence you. Sometimes, all they have to do is exist. And this is where the playstyle becomes almost philosophical. Most players want to be seen. They want to show their aim. They want to win the duel. They want the highlight, the invisible light. They can get the highlight without anyone seeing them coming. There's something almost disrespectful about it. You don't lose because your opponent out-aimed you. You lose because you didn't know the fight had started. And that's probably the most frustrating death in the finals.
Let's go to cash out B.
But there is another side to this, because once you become good at playing Invisible Light, you can start becoming addicted to the feeling of control. You know something other players don't. You know where they are. They don't know where you are. You can choose when the fight begins, and more importantly, you can choose when it ends. That feeling is powerful because traditional gunfights are chaotic. You expose yourself, your opponent exposes themselves. Both players take a risk. The Invisible Light tries to minimize that uncertainty. They want the fight to happen only when the odds already favor them. And this creates a very specific mindset. You stop thinking, how do I beat this player? And start thinking, how do I make sure this player never gets a chance? That's a completely different approach to competition. You're not trying to prove that you're better. You're trying to make the situation unfair before the fight even begins. And honestly, that's why the playstyle can be so effective. Now, here's the question everyone eventually asks. Is playing Invisible Light cowardly? I don't think that's the right question, because cowardice implies that the player is afraid to fight. But a good light player isn't necessarily afraid. They're calculating. There's a difference. If you're scared of losing, you avoid the fight. If you're calculating, you avoid the wrong fight. That's what separates a bad light from a terrifying one. A bad light disappears because they're losing. A good light disappears before the fight even becomes bad. They don't run away, they reset the situation. They disappear, move, wait, and suddenly they're behind you again. It's almost like fighting someone who gets to rewrite the rules every few seconds. And that is why experienced light players can feel impossible to pin down. You're not fighting their aim, you're fighting their decision making.
My sincere thanks.
But every playstyle has a weakness. And for the Invisible Light, it's obsession. Once you become used to controlling the engagement, you can start forcing it. You become convinced that there's always a perfect assassination waiting somewhere. So you leave your team, you disappear, you go hunting, you find someone, you miss. Suddenly, the entire plan collapses because underneath all the invisibility, you're still a light. You still have almost no room for mistakes. And this creates an interesting contradiction. The Invisible Light looks like the most confident player in the lobby, but mechanically, they're often playing with the least margin for error. One bad decision, and you're gone. One missed shot, and you're gone. One enemy turning around at the right moment, and you're gone. So, the playstyle creates this strange balance between confidence and vulnerability. You feel untouchable until suddenly you're not. And this is where I have to admit something. I wasn't watching these players from the outside. I was one of them. I know the feeling. You disappear, and suddenly the entire lobby feels slower. You stop thinking like a player and start thinking like a shadow. You watch people, you wait for mistakes, you look for isolation, you hear gunfire, and instead of running toward it, you calculate whether you should arrive 10 seconds later. Because that's when everyone is weak. Everyone is distracted. Everyone has already spent their abilities. And you're fresh, invisible, ready. That moment when you realize you're about to attack someone who has absolutely no idea you're there, that's the entire fantasy of the class. You're not the strongest player in the lobby. You're not the tankiest. You're not the one with the biggest gun. You're the player who decided that the fight would happen on your terms.
Sonar grenade out. Time to disappear. Legend. Scanning for a bomb.
So when you see an invisible light player, don't just think about the weapon, don't just think about the cloak, and don't just think he's hiding. Look at the mentality. This is a player who has chosen uncertainty over strength, positioning over durability, patience over pressure, information over confrontation. They don't need to dominate every fight, they just need to choose the right one. And maybe that's why, when an entire lobby is filled with invisible lights, the game starts feeling less like a shooter and more like a psychological thriller. You aren't constantly fighting, you're constantly wondering who's watching, who's waiting, who just disappeared, and most importantly, who is standing behind you right now. Because somewhere in that lobby, there's always a light, invisible, silent, waiting, and the scariest part, sometimes, that light is you.
Throwing sonar grenade.